Elena Ramirez stepped into Crescent Ridge Academy that morning with a strange feeling in her chest, like the air itself was waiting for something to explode. The polished hallways gleamed under rows of college acceptance banners. Harvard, Stanford, Princeton. She felt even smaller in her thrift store blazer, the one she'd ironed 3 times trying to make it look new. For 6 weeks, Elena had endured it all. The whispers, the accidental spills on her belongings, the mocking nickname, Scaredy Cat Ramirez. Every night, she told herself, just hold on until this substitute contract ends. Then you can leave this place behind. But somewhere deep inside her, a storm had been quietly building. Brandon Whitaker, an 18-year-old senior, 6'2", handsome in that polished, moneyed way, stalked the school like he owned it. And why wouldn't he? His father practically did. Brandon had turned Elena into his favorite target, just like he had done with others before her. But today felt different. She heard her father's voice in her mind, Sergeant Major Hector Ramirez, retired Marine Corps, teaching her judo as a 6-year-old. There are fights you can walk away from, Mija, and fights where walking away makes you part of the problem. Know the difference. For the first time in weeks, Elena's hands didn't shake as she picked up the chalk and wrote across the board, turning points in American history. Little did she know this day would become a turning point of its own, for her, for Brandon, and for every single person in that room. In the back row, Brandon smirked. That smirk that reminded Elena of a wolf circling a rabbit. 32 pairs of teenage eyes followed him, waiting for their alpha to strike. They had never seen Elena when she stopped being afraid. Brandon stood, his Rolex catching the warm Texas sunlight streaming through the windows. Elena kept her back to him, refusing to react. And then, Ryup. The sound of tearing fabric sliced through the air. Elena froze. The room fell silent for half a second, then erupted in gasps, laughter, the click of phone cameras capturing her humiliation from every angle. But Elena didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't bolt from the room like Brandon's other victims had. Instead, she turned. Slowly. Her dark brown eyes swept across the room, calm and sharp as a blade. Brandon Whitaker, she said, her voice soft but carrying a strange weight that made the laughter die in throats. You just made the biggest mistake of your life. The silence in the classroom felt alive, buzzing like a wire pulled too tight. 32 students froze in various poses, some clutching their phones mid-record, others wide-eyed and slack-jawed, not daring to breathe too loud. Elena Ramirez didn't flinch. Her torn blouse hung like a flag of humiliation, fabric dangling from her shoulders, her back exposed to the room's icy air conditioning. She pressed the ripped cloth against her chest and stared at Brandon Whitaker. For 6 weeks, she had endured his games. The first week, he had been subtle, his backpack accidentally knocking over her papers, his friends whispering "scaredy cat" as she passed. By the second week, it became bolder, fake questions during lectures designed to embarrass her, mocking comments about her thrift store outfits. The third week, someone had locked her out of her school computer account. She suspected Brandon, but with his family's influence, accusing him felt pointless. Principal Carter's words from her first day echoed in her mind. These are good kids from good families. Keep them quiet and get through the curriculum. You'll be fine. The first lie, she thought. Crescent Ridge Academy wasn't a school. It was a palace of privilege. The Whitaker Science Wing alone gleamed with smartboards and leather seats more luxurious than any furniture in her one-room apartment. Parents donated millions. Their children strutted through the hallways like little gods, immune to rules that applied to mere mortals. And Brandon Whitaker? He wasn't just a student. He was Crescent Ridge royalty. Elena remembered her first morning here. She had parked her battered 15-year-old Civic between a Tesla and a Land Rover, smoothed down her secondhand blazer, and stepped into a world that smelled of money and organic cafeteria food. She hadn't realized then that her lack of a pedigree was as visible as a neon sign over her head. The students had sized her up immediately at 5'4", barely 115 pounds soaking wet, and only 23 years old. She was practically their peer. Worse, she was a substitute teacher. The bottom of the educational food chain. Fresh meat, someone had whispered in the back, but Brandon hadn't taken the back row with the other troublemakers. No, he'd sat front and center on that first day, designer backpack at his feet, gold watch glinting in the morning sun. Miss Ramirez, he had said, cutting her introduction short. How old are you? You look like you could be my girlfriend's little sister. The class had laughed. Not cruelly, not yet. Just the sound of a pack sensing its alpha, waiting to see how far he would push. Elena forced a smile. The kind women learn to wear like armor. Old enough to be your teacher, Brandon. Now let's open to chapter 3. But seriously, he'd continued, leaning back with an easy confidence that screamed invincibility. Did you even student teach? Or did they just pull you off the street because you're cute? This time, the laughter had sharper edges. I completed my student teaching at Barton Creek High last semester, Elena had said, her voice tight. Barton Creek. Brandon's tone dripped with condescension. Isn't that the school with metal detectors? No wonder you look so scared. You're probably used to dodging bullets, not teaching actual students. The words had sliced clean through her composure. She remembered staring at 32 faces, waiting to see if she'd fight back or fold. She folded. Let's just focus on the lesson plan, she'd whispered. Brandon had smiled then, a predator's grin. He had found his prey for the semester. 6 weeks of humiliation had followed. Coffee mysteriously spilled near her belongings. Her printed assignments accidentally shredded by the office copier. Students coughing scaredy cat during lectures. Brandon raising his hand just to ask questions like, is it true substitute teachers are just people who couldn't get real jobs? The worst was the Snapchat videos. Clips of Elena fumbling with her bag, struggling to unlock her computer, bending to pick up papers Brandon had knocked over. Each one captioned, Day 14 of making her cry. Almost there. But Elena never cried. Not where they could see her at night. She would return to her tiny studio apartment, microwave ramen, and replay the day in her mind like a punishment. They'll get bored eventually, she told herself. This is temporary. Survive it. The second lie, Brandon didn't get bored. Today, though, today felt different. The sound of her shirt ripping lingered in the air like a gunshot. Elena turned slowly, still holding the torn fabric to her chest. Her eyes swept the room, memorizing who laughed loudest, who held up their phones, who sat frozen in shock. Lila. Elena said softly, I in the back corner. Lila and Gwen blinked in surprise at hearing her name. Yes. Miss Ramirez. Go to my car, please. Gray Honda Civic. There's a gym bag in the back seat. The keys are in my desk drawer. I what? Lila stammered. My gym bag. Please. The girl hesitated, eyes darting nervously between Elena and Brandon. What are you going to do? Brandon scoffed. Change into your Walmart workout clothes? This is even better than sit down. Elena's voice sliced clean through his words. The laughter died. Brandon's smirk faltered. Excuse me? He stepped closer, towering over her. Did you just give me an order? Yes, Elena said calmly, meeting his eyes without flinching. You will sit down now. Brandon's nostrils flared. You don't tell me what to do, substitute, he hissed. I own this place. My father is going through a divorce because your mother caught him with his secretary. You're angry. You're scared. And you're taking it out on anyone you see as weaker than you because it's the only control you have left. The words landed like precision strikes. I understand that, Brandon. I even sympathize. But you will sit down. Now. The room went cemetery quiet. Brandon's face drained of color, then flushed crimson. His hands curled into fists. You don't know anything about me, he growled. I know enough. Elena shifted her weight slightly. Unconsciously, her feet took a stance she hadn't used in years, balanced, rooted. I know you're about to make the second biggest mistake of your life. Brandon Whitaker's face burned crimson as Elena Ramirez stood her ground. For the first time since she'd set foot in Crescent Ridge Academy, she wasn't apologizing. She wasn't smiling nervously, wasn't pretending not to hear the cruel laughter or see the phones pointed at her like weapons. She simply stared. And in that silence, a strange shift rippled through the room. Some of the students, Madison Williams and her popular crew, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others kept their phones up, still recording, waiting for the big moment to share on private group chats. But a very few, looked at Elena with something like hope. No one had ever talked to Brandon Whitaker like this before. Elena could feel it happening, the old instinct stirring deep in her chest. Uncoiling like a predator, she thought she'd cage forever. For 5 years, she had sworn off judo. Not because she didn't love the sport. She did. The discipline. The precision. The power that came not from brute strength, but from knowing how to use your opponent's energy against them. But back at the University of Texas, during her junior year, she'd hurt someone in competition. Badly that it hadn't been intentional. Her opponent had come at her recklessly during a regional finals match. Elena's throw had been clean, textbook. But the landing wasn't a crack of bone. Blood on the mat. And her life changed. Though the referee cleared her of wrongdoing. Though her coaches begged her to return, Elena hung up her GI and swore she'd never fight again. You don't hurt people and call it sport, she told her father, Sergeant Major Hector Ramirez. His reply had stayed with her ever since. Mija, that wasn't violence. That was control, discipline. And someday, you're going to need those skills again, not for sport, but for survival. At the time, she thought he was just being dramatic. An old soldier seeing battles everywhere. But now, in this room, she wasn't so sure anymore. Are you serious right now? Brandon's voice broke through her memory, loud and mocking, that he spread his arms wide, addressing the class like a performer soaking in the applause. This substitute thinks she can boss me around? Do you know who my dad is? Do you know how fast I could get you fired, Miss Ramirez? Faster than you can say Goodwill Blazer. Snickers rolled through the room like tiny aftershocks. Sit down, Elena repeated. Her voice wasn't loud, but it had weight, like a command issued from deep inside her bones. But Brandon didn't sit. He stepped closer instead, his sneakers squeaking against the polished floored T6'2". He loomed over her. She could smell his cologne. Expensive, sharp, the kind of scent that screamed privilege. Make me. It wasn't a request. It was a challenge. Elena's fingers tightened on the shredded fabric she clutched against her chest. For 5 long weeks, she had swallowed her pride. Endured every insult, every accident, every carefully engineered humiliation. She had done what so many teachers, especially substitutes, did in elite schools like Crescent Ridge. She stayed quiet. She survived. But at what cost? Brandon had pushed every boundary because no one had ever stopped him. Not Principal Carter, who treated the boys' pranks like harmless antics. Not the other teachers, who avoided confrontation for fear of losing their jobs. Not even his own parents, too consumed with their high-profile divorce to notice the monster they were raising. Elena had told herself it wasn't her fight. That if she just kept her head down, she could finish out this assignment and move on. But wasn't that the third lie? In the back of the room, Lila Nguyen watched with wide eyes, her phone trembling in her hand. Unlike the others, Lila wasn't recording for gossip. She was documenting. For months, she had been compiling evidence. Screenshots, videos, emails. Every time Brandon or his friends targeted a teacher, a classmate, or a staff member, she added it to her hidden folder. 2 years of proof. It wasn't enough to stop him. Not yet. But if someone stood up to him, really stood up to him, maybe then the truth would matter. Lila held her breath as Miss Ramirez squared her shoulders. Do you even know what's about to happen here? Brandon sneered, his voice dripping with arrogance. This isn't Barton Creek High, substitute. You don't get to talk back to me. You don't get to look at me like that. Elena didn't blink. You think you're powerful because people are scared of you, she said softly. Brandon's smirk faltered, just for a fraction of a second. But fear isn't power. It's borrowed. And the people you've borrowed it from are about to take it back. The classroom went still. Somewhere outside, a bell rang for the next period. No one moved. Elena shifted her weight subtly, her feet adjusting into a stance she hadn't used since college. Her body remembered what her mind had tried to forget: how to center her gravity, how to breathe through adrenaline, how to make a single movement count. She didn't want to fight. She wasn't here to hurt anyone. But if Brandon forced her hand, she wouldn't hesitate. Not this time. Lila, Elena said suddenly, her gaze never leaving Brandon. Yes, Miss Ramirez. My gym bag. Is it in the car? Yes. Bring it to me. Yes, ma'am. The honorific slipped out of Lila's mouth before she could stop it. She bolted from the room, the door clicking shut behind her. What are you doing? Brandon demanded. Calling for backup? That's cute. He stepped closer. You don't get it. I own this place. You? You're nothing. You're enough. Elena's voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like a blade. She took a slow step forward, closing the space between them. Brandon, I don't want to hurt you. But if you touch me again, I will stop you. Do you understand? Brandon laughed, but there was no humor in it now. You're crazy, he said, his voice cracking ever so slightly. Maybe, Elena replied. Her dark eyes burned with an intensity he'd never seen before. Not from a teacher, not from anyone. But you're about to find out what happens when someone stops being afraid of you. The door opened. Lila reappeared, clutching a gray gym bag to her chest. She hesitated in the doorway, unsure whether to enter. Bring it here, Elena said gently. Lila obeyed, walking past frozen classmates to hand the bag to her teacher. Thank you, Elena whispered, taking the bag without breaking eye contact with Brandon. Then she unzipped it. Her fingers brushed over thick white cotton and a black belt frayed with years of use. For the first time in 5 years, Elena Ramirez let herself remember who she was. Not just a teacher, not just a substitute, not a scared young woman trying to survive. She was a fighter, and some battles weren't meant to be avoided. The weight of 32 pairs of eyes pressed against Elena Ramirez like a physical force. She could feel them, students frozen in their chairs, unsure whether to laugh, record, or run. Even Brandon Whitaker, still standing a few feet away, seemed momentarily uncertain. Elena's fingers brushed over the folded white cotton in her gym bag, feeling the familiar texture of her old judo GI. She hadn't planned on this. Not today, not ever. But somewhere deep inside her, a switch had flipped, and no more running. No more folding. For 5 long weeks, she had let Brandon dictate the rules. He humiliated her. He turned her into a target, an object of ridicule. She endured it because she thought it was the professional thing to do, because she needed this job, this paycheck, this health insurance. But there was a difference between patience and complicity, and she wasn't going to be complicit anymore. Everyone except Brandon, Elena said quietly, her voice even and calm. Go to the library. Tell Mrs. Patterson I'll be there shortly to continue today's lesson. The students stared at her, and one moved. Go. Her tone wasn't loud, but it carried a strange authority, like a general giving orders to soldiers. Why you can't do that? Madison Williams stammered from the front row. Her perfectly manicured fingers clutched her phone like a lifeline. You're not allowed to kick us out. You're just a sub. Elena's gaze flicked to her, sharp as a blade. Unless you want to be part of what happens next, I suggest you leave. Now, a nervous ripple passed through the room. Some students stood slowly, others bolted for the door. A few hesitated, phones still raised, unwilling to miss the spectacle. But Elena's eyes swept over them, and one by one, they faltered under her stare. Even teenagers knew instinctively when they were in the presence of something dangerous. Brandon laughed, a harsh, disbelieving sound. Are you serious right now? You think you can order them around? You think you can order me around? He stepped closer, and Elena noticed the telltale signs, his clenched fists, his jaw tightening, the slight tremor in his voice. For the first time, Brandon Whitaker wasn't entirely sure of himself. Lila Nguyen was the last to leave. She paused at the door, clutching her phone. Elena met her eyes. Stay just outside, Lila. Keep recording. Make sure there's a clear angle through the window. Lila blinked, startled, but nodded. Yes, ma'am. Then she slipped into the hallway, her phone already angled back toward the classroom door. And then there were two. The room felt different now. Emptier, quieter, the October sunlight painting long golden stripes across the floor. Brandon and Elena stood in the center of it all, the air between them charged like a live wire. You're done, Brandon said finally, his voice low and trembling with anger. He pointed a finger at her. I'm calling my dad. You'll be fired by lunch. You'll never teach again. You think you can embarrass me? Talk about my family. Elena didn't flinch. She began slipping her arms into the sleeves of her GI, moving with slow, deliberate precision. My father taught me something, Brandon, she said softly. He said there are 3 types of battles. The ones you can walk away from, and you should. The ones you can't walk away from, and you fight smart. And then there are the battles where walking away makes you complicit in something evil. She tied her frayed black belt around her waist, the movements smooth and practiced, her hands no longer shaking. This is one of those battles. Brandon barked a laugh, but it sounded hollow. You're insane, he said. You're scared, Elena corrected. Her voice was quiet, almost gentle, but each word landed with the weight of a hammer. And for the first time in your life, you don't know what happens next. Brandon took a step back, then caught himself and sneered. You can't touch me. I'm a student. You'll go to jail. Elena nodded once. You're right. I won't touch you. Then she looked up, her dark brown eyes gleaming. But you'll touch me, just like you've been doing for weeks. And this time, Brandon, she smiled. And it wasn't nervous or forced. That it was the smile her opponents used to see on the mat seconds before they hit the floor. This time, physics will touch you back. For the first time in a long time, Brandon Whitaker felt something unfamiliar claw at his chest, fear. The door clicked shut behind Lila Nguyen, leaving Elena Ramirez and Brandon Whitaker alone in the classroom. The sunlight filtering through the tall windows turned golden and sharp, cutting across the room like blades. Dust motes floated lazily in the air, mocking the weight in the space between them. Elena tied the last knot on her frayed black belt. The simple act felt ceremonial, as if she were binding up 5 years of fear, self-doubt, and silence and replacing them with purpose. This wasn't about revenge. This was about balance. You're insane, Brandon said again, but his voice had lost its earlier bravado. He was still standing tall, but there was something in his eyes now, a flicker of uncertainty, of recognition. Brandon wasn't used to people resisting him. His world was built on compliance. Teachers who looked the other way because they didn't want trouble. Classmates who laughed at his jokes because they were terrified of becoming his next target. Parents who solved his problems with checks and lawyers. Elena Ramirez didn't fit into any of his categories. You should sit down, Brandon, she said softly, before you do something you can't take back. Brandon clenched his fists at his sides. You don't get it, do you? He hissed. This isn't Barton Creek. This isn't your little ghetto high school. This is Crescent Ridge. My family built this place. I own it. I own you. Elena didn't flinch. That's where you're wrong, she said, her voice steady. You don't own anyone. You've just convinced yourself you do because no one's ever stopped you. He took a step closer. You're gonna regret this, he growled. I don't think so. Her tone wasn't defiant or mocking. It was calm, certain, and something about that certainty made Brandon hesitate. For the first time, he noticed how she stood, feet planted firmly, shoulders loose but ready, weight balanced as if she'd spent her entire life preparing for this exact moment. Outside the door, Lila Nguyen pressed her phone closer to the window, her hands trembling. She couldn't hear what they were saying, but she could see it all up Brandon's hulking frame looming over Miss Ramirez. Miss Ramirez, smaller, but somehow unshakable for weeks. Lila had watched her teacher endure everything Brandon threw at her, quietly, painfully, without fighting back. But this was different. This wasn't quiet. This was a storm about to break. Last chance, Elena said. Sit down. Brandon's lip curled. You think you're some kind of hero? You think you're strong? His voice cracked. You're nothing. You're weak. That's why you're a sub. That's why you shop at thrift stores. That's why my dad's going to crush you when You've been hurting people for years, Brandon. Elena's voice was low, but it cut through his tirade like a scalpel. Mr. Alvarez. Mrs. Patel. Every substitute you ever thought was beneath you. You convinced yourself you were untouchable. But you were wrong. She took a small step forward. And now, you're about to learn the difference between strength and cruelty. That did it. Brandon's face twisted into a mask of rage. You're dead, he roared, lunging at her. 6'2". 200 pounds of privilege and anger launched across the room. His fist came up, his body moving like a freight train without brakes. Time seemed to slow. Elena saw every detail. The wildness in his eyes, the clumsy way he pulled his arm back, his entire center of gravity leaning forward. He'd never been in a real fight before, but she had in an instant. Elena's body moved on its own. Right hand snaked out, catching Brandon's attacking arm. Left hand gripped the collar of his designer sweatshirt. Her hips turned, loaded his weight. And then the world pivoted. Ogashi. Major hip throw point, one of the first techniques she had learned at age 6. One of the most effective. Brandon Whitaker's feet left the ground. His body flipped through the air in a wide, helpless arc, and then, thud. He hit the polished floor hard enough to knock the wind out of him. The sound echoed through the empty classroom like a gunshot. Brandon gasped, clutching his side, eyes wide with shock. You're crazy, he sputtered, trying to scramble backward. You'll go to jail. You can't. Elena stepped forward, her presence filling the room. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. That, she said softly, was for Mr. Alvarez. For Mrs. Patel. For every teacher and student you ever thought was less than human. Miss Ramirez. A new voice cut through the tension. The door slammed open. Principal Carter barged in, face flushed, with 2 security officers at his heels. Brandon saw his chance and screamed. She attacked me. She's crazy. You've got to arrest her. Elena didn't move. She stood in the center of the room, GI tied tight, black belt gleaming like a line drawn in the sand. This isn't what it looks like, she said calmly. Principal Carter pointed an accusing finger. You're done here, Ramirez. Security, wait. Another voice interrupted. It was sharp, commanding, feminine. Caroline Whitaker, Brandon's mother, stepped into the room. She wasn't smiling, and in her hand, she held her phone, the screen still playing a video. A video Lila Nguyen had sent her 20 minutes ago. The doorframe seemed too small for the storm that walked through it. Caroline Whitaker, impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit, designer heels clicking against the tile floor, entered the room like winter personified. Her cold eyes swept over the scene. Her son, Brandon, sprawled on the floor clutching his side. Principal Carter standing rigid with fury, and Elena Ramirez, calm, steady, wearing a martial arts GI and black belt as though it were armored. Caroline's lips thinned. Explain, she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. Mom. Brandon gasped, scrambling to his feet, clutching at her arm like a drowning man reaching for a lifeline. She's insane. She attacked me. You have to. Be quiet, Brandon. Caroline's tone froze him mid-sentence. He had never heard his mother speak to him like that before. But quiet. Principal Carter seized the moment. Mrs. Whitaker, he began, his voice syrupy with manufactured outrage. Thank goodness you're here. This woman has just physically assaulted your son. Rest assured, we're calling the police. She'll be fired immediately, and Principal Carter. Caroline didn't look at him. She lifted her phone, the screen still glowing. Perhaps you should save your speeches until after we watch this together. She pressed play. The sound of tearing fabric filled the room. Tinny through the phone's speakers. Brandon's voice followed. Oops. Maybe you should buy better clothes, Miss Ramirez. Then the laughter. The jeering. The image of Brandon's hand gripping the back of Elena's blouse. The deliberate pull. Her blouse tearing in half as she clutched it to her chest. Brandon's face went pale. Wait. Mom. I can explain. Explain what? Caroline's voice was icy. Explain why you assaulted a teacher in front of 32 witnesses. Principal Carter blustered, stepping forward. That video is taken out of context. Mrs. Whitaker, your son is under immense stress. College applications, the divorce, he lashed out. But we can resolve this internally. Miss Ramirez is clearly unstable. She showed up to class in a costume, and she enough. Caroline's voice cracked like a whip. You're done, Carl. Carter blinked. Excuse me? You heard me. Caroline finally turned her gaze on him, and the weight behind it made the man visibly shrink. For 2 years, you've ignored teacher complaints. 2 years of documented abuse swept under the rug because my husband's donations lined your pockets. Did you think I wouldn't find out? Mrs. Whitaker, my divorce lawyer sent me this bank statement this morning. She held up her phone again. $50,000. Transferred from my husband's private account to a shell education fund under your name. Every single time there was an incident involving Brandon, a payment appeared. Elena said nothing. She didn't need to. Caroline Whitaker had just ripped the rug out from under every single person who thought they were in control. Brandon sputtered, trying to reclaim the narrative. She's lying. That video, it's fake. You can't believe her. She's just stop talking. Caroline didn't raise her voice, but Brandon fell silent instantly. The 2 security guards in the doorway shifted uncomfortably. One of them, a grizzled man with a silver mustache, finally spoke up. Ma'am, he said to Caroline, do you want us to detain her? Or, you'll do nothing, Caroline snapped. Miss Ramirez has done nothing wrong. Then, softer. In fact, it seems she's the only adult in this entire school behaving with integrity. Brandon's voice broke. Mom, you can't do this. Dad will. Your father is the reason you think you can treat people like garbage, Caroline shot back. Well, that ends today. Elena watched the scene unfold, her breathing steady. This wasn't the ending she had expected, but maybe it was better. Miss Ramirez, Caroline said, turning to her. I'm deeply sorry for my son's behavior. I'm ashamed that it took this long for me to see what's been happening. Whatever legal support you need, you'll have it. And as for you, she faced Principal Carter again. You'll have your resignation on my lawyer's desk by Monday. Or we'll have a very public conversation about corruption, bribery, and systematic abuse. For the first time in his life, Brandon Whitaker looked small. Not because he had been thrown to the floor minutes earlier, not because his mother had caught him red-handed, but because, in that moment, he realized his world was crumbling, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. You're all insane, Brandon said suddenly, his voice rising. You're ruining my life. He spun on Elena, eyes blazing. This is your fault. He lunged. For a split second, the world froze. Brandon Whitaker's face twisted with rage as he lunged across the classroom, his 6'2" frame barreling toward Elena Ramirez like a freight train of privilege and desperation. This is your fault, he screamed, fist cocked back. You ruined everything. Outside in the hallway, Lila Nguyen gasped. Her phone, still pressed to the window, trembled in her grip as she recorded every second. Miss Ramirez, she whispered under her breath, her heart pounding so loud it drowned out everything else. Elena didn't move. Not at first. She saw it all. The wildness in Brandon's eyes, the awkward, untrained swing of his fist, his weight pitching forward recklessly. She saw the future unfold in front of her, his punch connecting, her falling to the floor, security dragging her away in handcuffs while Principal Carter smirked in victory. That was one future, but she chose a different one that the moment Brandon's fist came within striking distance. Elena's body reacted before her mind could catch up. Thousands of hours of training flooded her muscles. Years of early morning drills, of practicing throws until her hands bled, of learning that real strength wasn't about power. It was about control. She stepped inside his reach, her right hand clamped onto his attacking arm. Her left hand gripped his sweatshirt collar. A twist of her hips, a shift of her weight. The air hummed with energy, and then Brandon Whitaker was flying. Osotogari. Major outer reap. A textbook judo throw. Clean. Efficient. Devastating. Brandon's feet left the ground. For a single, suspended moment, he hung there in midair, wide-eyed with shock. And then gravity reclaimed him. Wham. The sound of 200 pounds of Bullies slamming into the polished floor echoed off the classroom walls like a gunshot. Brandon let out a strangled gasp, all the air rushing from his lungs. He lay flat on his back, staring up at the ceiling tiles as if they held the secrets of the universe. His gold watch was askew. His hair mussed. His entire carefully curated image shattered. Elena didn't release him immediately. She knelt, maintaining control of his arm, pinning him gently but firmly to the ground. You're done, Brandon, she said, her voice calm and even. I don't want to hurt you, but I will defend myself. Principal Carter stumbled forward, his face pale with shock. This is assault, he sputtered. You're finished, Ramirez. You're wrong, came a deep voice from the doorway. Coach Reynolds, the wrestling coach, had arrived. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed over his chest. I saw the whole thing. Kid attacked her. She defended herself with minimum necessary force. Textbook self-defense. He nodded approvingly at Elena. Actually, textbook judo. Nice work. Caroline Whitaker stepped past Carter without a word. She knelt beside her son, her cold eyes locking on his. You thought you were untouchable, she said softly, her voice sharp enough to draw blood. You thought you could treat people like objects, like toys to break and discard. But look where it got you. Brandon turned his head away, his cheeks burning with shame. Elena stood slowly, straightening her GI, her black belt trailing like a banner of quiet strength. She looked down at Brandon, her voice soft but firm. That was for every teacher you tried to break, every student you mocked, every person you convinced was powerless. Security guards lingered awkwardly near the door. Mrs. Whitaker? One of them asked. Caroline straightened to her full height. Take my son to the nurse's office. He'll need to be checked for injuries. She shot a cold look at Brandon. Though the only thing hurt here is his pride. Yes, ma'am. As they helped Brandon to his feet, his legs wobbled. He didn't look at Elena. You can't do this, he whispered to his mother. Dad will. Your father, Caroline cut him off, will see exactly who you've become. And then he'll answer for the part he played in it. Elena watched in silence as Brandon was led away. A strange calm settled over her. For 5 years, she had avoided conflict. She thought fighting back made her dangerous, but now she understood. Fighting back didn't make her like Brandon. It made her nothing like him. Coach Reynolds clapped her on the shoulder as he passed. Hell of a throw, Ramirez. Bet your old coach at UT would have been proud. The classroom felt eerily quiet after Brandon Whitaker was escorted out. The sound of his angry footsteps echoing down the hall faded, leaving only the faint hum of the air conditioner and the rhythmic thump of Elena Ramirez's heartbeat in her ears. She stood still in her GI, black belt tied neatly, hands resting loosely at her sides. Her body was calm, her mind was calm, but the storm was far from over. Principal Carter finally found his voice. "This is outrageous," he barked, jabbing a finger at Elena. "You've humiliated a student, physically assaulted him, and violated every policy this school stands for. You're finished, Ramirez." "Security, enough, Carl." Caroline Whitaker's voice cut across his tirade like a blade. Everyone turned to her. The tension in her posture was unmistakable. Not just anger, but disappointment so cold it seemed to crystallize the air around her. "You'll do nothing," she said icily. "You've done enough already." "Mrs. Whitaker, you can't. Be quiet." Caroline's sharp tones silenced Carter instantly. "You've ignored years of complaints from teachers and students alike. You've allowed a toxic culture to thrive here because it was easier to cash checks than confront reality." She lifted her phone. "Would you like to explain these?" The screen lit up with video after video. Brandon spilling coffee over Mr. Alvarez's gradebook. Brandon deleting files from Mrs. Patel's computer while laughing with his friends. Brandon mocking substitute teachers on Snapchat, each clip crueler than the last. And then the emails, dozens of them. Teachers begging for support, warning that Brandon's behavior was escalating. Every single one had been sent to Principal Carter. Every single one had been ignored. "This is a witch hunt." Carter sputtered. "These videos are taken out of context. Save it," Caroline snapped. "Do you really think my husband's position on the school board will shield you now? Because it won't." In the back of the room, Lila Nguyen stood quietly, still holding her phone like a sword. Elena met her eyes and gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod. Lila nodded back. She had done it. 2 years of quietly collecting evidence. 2 years of waiting for the right moment. And today, she'd finally found her ally. "I suggest you tender your resignation by Monday," Caroline said to Carter, her tone smooth but lethal. "Otherwise, we'll have a very public conversation about systematic corruption and the bribery payments you've been accepting to keep scandals quiet." Carter's face turned ashen. "You have no proof of—" "Oh, I have plenty of proof," Caroline interrupted. She turned to the two security guards lingering near the door. "Gentlemen, do you see any reason to detain Miss Ramirez?" The older of the two shook his head slowly. "No, ma'am. Looked like self-defense to me. And, well, I've got grandkids in this school. I don't like what I'm seeing here." Carter's mouth opened and closed like a fish. He seemed to deflate right there in front of them. Elena spoke for the first time in minutes. "Principal Carter," she said softly. "You could have stopped this weeks ago. Years ago. But you chose not to." Her words weren't angry. They weren't loud. But they landed like hammers. "Instead of protecting your staff, you protected the person causing the harm. You made every teacher and student here less safe." Carter dropped his gaze to the floor. Caroline turned to Elena. "Miss Ramirez," she said, her voice softening slightly. "You've shown more integrity in one day than most people show in their entire careers. I'll make sure you're protected." "I don't need protection," Elena said calmly. "I just need this school to start protecting its people." Caroline studied her for a long moment. Then she gave a small nod. "It will." The tension in the room seemed to ease slightly, but Elena knew it wasn't over yet. This wasn't just about Brandon anymore. This was about changing a system that had failed over and over again. And if she had to be the one to light the spark, so be it. Coach Reynolds clapped Elena on the shoulder as he passed. "Hell of a day, Ramirez. You might have just saved a lot more people than you realize." As Elena gathered her things, her gym bag, her lesson plan, the shredded remains of her blouse, she looked around the room one last time. The place where she'd been mocked, humiliated, dismissed, and now respected. But there was still one more battle ahead. She could feel it coming, the final test. And this time, She wasn't going to face it alone. The final bell of the day rang out across Crescent Ridge Academy, its familiar chime echoing through hallways that suddenly felt different. Elena Ramirez stood in her now empty classroom, clutching the tattered remains of her blouse in one hand, her gym bag in the other. The quiet felt heavy, not oppressive, but cleansing. For 6 weeks, this room had been a battlefield. Today, she had won. A soft knock broke the silence. Elena turned to see Madison Williams standing timidly in the doorway. The same Madison who had laughed the loudest at Brandon's jokes. The same Madison who had filmed Elena's humiliation 6 weeks earlier. "Miss Ramirez?" Madison's voice wavered. Can we come in?" Elena hesitated, then nodded. Madison stepped aside, and the rest of the class filed in behind her. All 31 of them. Gone were the smirks and whispers, the mocking eyes and raised phones. Now, their faces were open. Vulnerable. For the first time, they looked like what they really were. Children trying to navigate a world that had taught them all the wrong lessons about power. Madison took a deep breath. "I'm sorry." Her voice cracked on the words. "We're all sorry." Elena said nothing. She watched as one by one the students nodded in agreement. Logan Bennett stepped forward, his usual cocky grin nowhere to be seen. "I knew what Brandon was doing was wrong," he admitted. "But I didn't say anything. I thought it wasn't my problem. That if I stayed quiet, I'd be safe." He met Elena's gaze, shame in his eyes. "You showed us that staying quiet is just as bad." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Elena set down her gym bag and straightened her shoulders. "Being scared doesn't make you bad," she said softly. "Staying scared when you could help someone. That's the problem." The students shifted uneasily. Madison spoke again. Will you keep teaching us?" Elena looked around the room, her eyes lingering on each face. She thought of all the times she had come home exhausted, convinced she was failing them. She thought of the moment Brandon had ripped her blouse and she had felt 18 again, powerless, humiliated. And then she thought of the way they had watched her today. Not with fear, not with pity, with respect. "That depends," she said finally. "Are you ready to learn? Really learn, not just about history, but about standing up for what's right?" 31 heads nodded in unison. "Yes, Miss Ramirez." For the first time in weeks, Elena smiled. A real smile, not the nervous, fragile one she had worn like a mask. "Then yes, I'll keep teaching you." The tension in the room broke like a dam, relieved laughter. Small smiles, even a few tears. For the first time, this felt like a classroom. Days later, Elena returned to her classroom on a Monday morning to find a package on her desk. Inside was a brand new blouse. Not designer, but sturdy and well-made, with a note signed by all 31 students. "For the teacher who taught us that strength comes in all sizes." But that wasn't all. Pinned to the back wall were 31 essays, each titled, "What Miss Ramirez Taught Me." Madison wrote about learning to stand up to her own parents. Logan admitted he'd been a coward and promised to do better. Even the quiet students Elena had barely heard speak had written pages about feeling safer, braver, more willing to defend others. Elena sat at her desk, holding the simple blouse in her hands. And for the first time since this ordeal began, she cried. Not tears of frustration or fear. Tears of validation. Tears of relief. She'd spent 5 years running from who she was, afraid that her strength would hurt people. But she'd forgotten the most important lesson her father ever taught her. Sometimes the greatest act of gentleness is refusing to let cruelty win. In the weeks that followed, Brandon Whitaker's world unraveled that he was expelled, ordered into therapy, sentenced to a year of community service at the very kind of inner-city school he once mocked. But somewhere along the way, Brandon began to change. Not quickly, not perfectly, but he began. Caroline Whitaker divorced her husband, used her settlement to establish an anti-bullying foundation, and became an unlikely ally to Elena. They worked together to change the culture that had enabled Brandon's behavior in the first place. Lila Nguyen earned a full scholarship to film school. Her documentary about systemic bullying in elite schools went viral and won 3 national awards. Coach Reynolds started a self-defense program for teachers. Elena volunteered to help. Principal Carter resigned in disgrace that he now teaches driver's ed in another state. As for Elena Ramirez, she became the teacher she had always wanted to be. Not the scared substitute apologizing for existing, but the woman who showed up every day ready to fight for her students, with words, with wisdom, and when absolutely necessary, with the skills her father had insisted she never forget. She kept the torn blouse, framed it, actually, hung it on her classroom wall with a small plaque that read, "Sometimes standing up means knowing when to throw someone down." Ramirez years later, at Elena's wedding, Lila stood in a bridesmaid dress and gave a speech that would go viral in its own right. "Miss Ramirez saved my life. Not in the dramatic, pull you out of a burning building way, but in the quiet, show you that you're worth defending way that I thought she was weak at first. But I was wrong. She wasn't weak. She was choosing not to destroy him until the day he left her no choice. And when she finally fought back, she didn't just defend herself, she defended all of us." The crowd erupted in applause. Some stories end with violence. This one began with it and ended with something far more powerful: transformation. One throw at a time, one student at a time, one truth at a time.